Chapter 1. The Unannounced Visitor. A soft summer breeze drifted through the manicured hedges of St. Mary Mead as Mrs. Petherick's annual garden party reached its peak. Tulips in pastel shades nodded gently beside the neatly trimmed rose bushes, and the hum of polite conversation mingled with the gentle clink of porcelain teacups. Under a striped gazebo, neighbors traded recipes, local gossip, and observations about the weather with the comfortable familiarity of long acquaintance. Miss Marple, seated on a wrought iron bench near the lilac bushes, watched them all with an artful composure. Her knitting needles clicked in a steady rhythm as she listened to Mrs. Petherick's boastful description of last week's flower show, her prize-winning begonias presented with an air of triumph. The judge practically swooned when he saw them, Mrs. Petherick declared, her voice lilting with pride. "I do think a little splendor can't go amiss, Clara dear." "Indeed," replied Miss Marple, smiling placidly, "though sometimes a modest bloom can conceal more surprises." Across the lawn, Mr. Blackwood, the retired colonel, admired the spread of sandwiches and delicate cakes. His uniform posture softened as he chatted with Miss Marple's nephew, Raymond West, a journalist home for the weekend. Raymond leaned in animated, launching into a tale of London's newspaper intrigues. Miss Marple observed their exchange, Raymond's restless energy contrasting with the colonel's quiet amusement. Everything appeared serene until a sudden interruption shattered the idyll. The garden gate swung open on its hinges, creaking in a manner so conspicuous that several heads turned in unison. A figure stood framed in the late afternoon light. A tall man in a well-cut suit, his tie slightly askew, and his hat clenched nervously beneath one arm. He carried neither invitation nor card, and for a moment, neither guest nor host ventured forward to greet him. I hope I'm not late," the stranger stammered, his accent faintly foreign, perhaps French or Belgian. Miss Marple? Is she here?" A ripple of surprise passed through the gathering. Mrs. Petherick frowned, clutching her teacup as if sensing impropriety. "Madam, you must have the wrong address," she said primly. "This is my garden party, not— Or are you unwell, dear?" Miss Marple rose gracefully from her bench and approached the newcomer, her keen eyes assessing every detail. "Good afternoon," she said. "I am Miss Jane Marple. You must forgive our surprise. We did not expect a visitor." The stranger inclined his head, revealing a pallor more than posture befitting anxiety. "Miss Marple, yes, thank you. I am Monsieur Lucien Dupré. I wrote to you some weeks ago concerning a matter of mutual acquaintance. I hope to discuss it in person." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. She had no recollection of any letter from Lucien Dupré, nor of any acquaintance in common, yet she did not expose her uncertainty. "I'm afraid no letter has reached me," she replied softly. "But if you will join us, perhaps Raymond West might offer refreshments while we talk." At this, the colonel elbowed Raymond with exaggerated ostentation and offered the stranger a chair beside the lemonade table. A maid discreetly poured Dupré a glass of iced tea, the condensation beating on the glass like tiny dewdrops. Mrs. Petherick, regaining her composure, hovered nearby. "You say you wrote to Miss Marple? To me that seems most irregular. Our esteemed detective does not usually conduct business at garden parties." Dupré swallowed, his gaze flicking to Miss Marple for support. "I feared intrusion," he admitted, voice low. "But time is of the essence. I was to call, only I'd forgot to knock." A hush descended. The phrase struck a discordant note. Too enigmatic to be mere malapropism, and yet too careless to be a straightforward apology. Gossiping neighbors exchanged glances. The vicar's wife adjusted her hat with mild concern. Even the children, murmuring as they chased butterflies, paused momentarily. Miss Marple stepped forward again. "If you'll forgive a small reprimand, one should never forget to knock. It is the courtesy that marks one's purpose. May I ask, Monsieur Dupré, what business brings you so urgently to our quiet village?" Dupré's face shadowed with gravity. He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Marple, it concerns the disappearance of my sister, Elise. She had reason to believe that someone in St. Mary Mead, someone who attended your gatherings, was observing her. She was frightened. I wrote to warn you that she might come here for help, and now she is missing." A collective murmur rose among the guests. Mrs. Petherick clutched the edge of the tablecloth. Raymond West, notebook at the ready, raised an inquisitive eyebrow. The colonel cleared his throat behind a stiff salute. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her eyes gleamed with guarded interest. "Your sister feared someone here," she repeated. "You say she vanished after attending one of my gatherings?" "Yes," Dupré affirmed, his hand trembling around the glass. "She wrote that she discovered something, a secret that could harm powerful people. She said she would meet me here by these very hedges." Mrs. Petherick swallowed audibly. "Powerful people? My word." Miss Marple folded her hands. "Monsieur Dupré, I see that this requires more discussion, but perhaps it would be best if we continued indoors, where we can speak without alarming the neighbors." As the guests collected themselves, the afternoon's gaiety seemed to recede like a shadow. The baker's cakes and tea sandwiches, once the centerpiece of genteel pleasure, now stood witness to a more ominous turn of events. Miss Marple offered Dupré her arm, guiding him toward the drawing-room's open French windows. Behind them, the garden party resumed, but with a newly awakened tension, whispers fluttering like startled birds. And so, in the tranquil heart of St. Mary Mead, a crisis had been set in motion, a forgotten knock, a missing sister, and the unspoken promise of secrets waiting to be revealed. Chapter 2. Conversations in the Drawing Room. Miss Marple led Monsieur Dupré through the French windows into the cool hush of the drawing room, its pale green walls lined with portrait miniatures and well-polished mahogany furniture. The heavy scent of roses drifted in on the breeze, mingling with the distant murmur of the garden party that still carried on outside. As the door closed softly behind them, the tension that had rippled through St. Mary Mead dissipated into a steady undercurrent of unease. Raymond West rose from a chaise longue where he had been idly sketching the scene with his notebook, pencil poised. "Shall I fetch tea, Aunt Jane?" he offered, brows arching with professional curiosity. "Perhaps some—" "Tea will be lovely," Miss Marple interjected with a gentle nod, then turned her attention back to Dupré. "Monsieur Dupré, please take a seat. We shall speak candidly here." Dupré lowered himself into an armchair by the fireplace, running a hand through his dark hair as though trying to smooth away his worry. "Thank you, Miss Marple," he murmured. His accent carried soft vowels tinged with hesitation, as if each word were weighed against his fear. The maid appeared quietly and set a silver tray upon a side table, a teapot hissing softly under the wrought iron kettle stand, a plate of finger biscuits, and delicate bone china cups. Mrs. Petherick hovered at the threshold, the brim of her hat tilted at a cautious angle, but Miss Marple gently shooed her away. "Thank you, Mrs. Petherick, but please excuse us. This is a matter of urgency." Obligingly, Mrs. Petherick retreated with a curt nod, leaving the trio in semi-privacy. The maid poured tea into the cups, and Raymond offered one to Dupré, who accepted with a trembling hand. The first sip brought a faint relief to his pallid features. Miss Marple seated herself opposite Dupré, her knitting set aside neatly on the sofa. "Now," she began, voice calm but firm, "tell me exactly what you know of your sister's disappearance." Dupré leaned forward, shoulders curled inward. Elise had been staying at a cottage on the outskirts of the village these past fortnight. She came here occasionally for your gatherings. She admired your reputation, Miss Marple, though she never spoke of the reasons. He paused, as though unsure how much to reveal next. 2 nights ago, she did not return from a walk she took before sunset. I was to meet her here today because she believed she had uncovered something disturbing. Miss Marple inclined her head. She discovered something that concerned powerful people, you say. Did she confide in anyone else? He shook his head. Only brief notes in my last letter, the one I wrote some weeks ago. But since her disappearance, the notes have vanished. She warned that there were eyes watching her. I feared someone intercepted her messages. Raymond frowned. "Do you have a copy of that letter? Anything she left behind might help us." Dupré's eyes darkened. "No. When I arrived at the cottage yesterday morning, there was no sign of her, no personal effects, no letters, no trace of a struggle. It was as if she had never been there." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the mantel, where a small clock ticked quietly. She knitted her brows, a rare gesture of concentration. Did the cottage seem undisturbed beyond her disappearance? Any sign that someone searched her room? "Mausoleum quiet," Dupré replied, voice low. No overturned furniture, no locked doors forced open. He swallowed and glanced at Raymond. I found her writing desk unlocked, but her journal was missing. A journal? Miss Marple's interest sharpened. Personal writings can contain difficulties. Did she mention any names or events that alarmed her? He took another sip of tea before answering. Only vague references to meetings she attended in London last spring. She spoke of society's archive, hidden documents, and a man she did not trust. But she never divulged who, only that she feared for her safety. Miss Marple tapped her fingers lightly against her teacup. Hidden archives in London. That suggests something beyond village affairs. She glanced at Raymond. My nephew, though practicing journalism, might have contacts there. Raymond, do you know of any societies handling sensitive materials? Raymond considered. There's a historical record society, but they usually keep things above board. Others, like the Antiquarian Circle, sometimes hold private collections, but nothing so clandestine as an underground archive. Miss Marple leaned back. Monsieur Dupré, your sister was cautious. She wrote to me weeks ago asking for advice, yet I received no letter. It troubles me that her note was never delivered. Dupré's face tightened. I don't know why. Perhaps the letter was intercepted. Whoever feared her knowledge would have reason to stop her from reaching you. Miss Marple tapped the side of her cup thoughtfully. Very well. We must retrace her last known movements. You said she took a walk 2 nights ago. Did she mention her destination? Dupré shook his head. Only that she had an errand. But villagers reported seeing her later that evening, just after dusk, near Old Hollow Lane, by the abandoned mill. He shivered. They thought she was speaking with someone, a figure in a dark coat. A figure in a dark coat, repeated Miss Marple. Did anyone recognize this person? One witness, a milkmaid named Annie Cartwright, said the figure had a deep voice and spoke in a low whisper. Annie thought it was a postman at first. Dupré's lips twitched in a wry half-smile. But that voice, it was not Mr. Benson's. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. We shall speak with this Annie Cartwright shortly. But first, Monsieur Dupré, tell me about your sister's relationships here. Did she confide in any friend? Any one person who might have helped her? Dupré's gaze grew distant. She was close to the vicar's daughter, Miss Emily Rudd. They corresponded regularly. But Emily's letters have gone unanswered. I fear she too may have been silenced. Raymond opened his notebook. Then we must interview Miss Rudd at once. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, but gently, for not everyone welcomes the scrutiny that follows a disappearance. Meanwhile, Monsieur Dupré, we shall arrange for you to stay at the vicarage tonight. You may feel safer among friends, and we can continue this conversation in the morning after rest. Dupré's relief was palpable. Thank you, Miss Marple. I would appreciate that greatly. As the maid cleared the teacups, Miss Marple rose and smoothed her skirt. We shall reconvene shortly. First, I shall speak with Miss Emily Rudd and Annie Cartwright. After that, you and I will examine the cottage together. Dupré stood unsteadily for a moment before steadying himself. Very well, Miss Marple added quietly. And Raymond, kindly see that no one tampers with any of the letters at St. Mary Mead Post Office. Someone may try to cover their tracks. Raymond's dark eyes sparkled. Consider it done, and Jane. Together they left the drawing room. Miss Marple poised and purposeful, Raymond protective and curious, and Dupré following with a mixture of fear and hope. Beyond the window, the garden party had resumed its cheerful clamor, oblivious to the threads of conspiracy and danger that now bound the little village together. In the fading light of early evening, questions multiplied. Who met Elise at the abandoned mill? Who silenced her letters, and why? And what secret had she uncovered about people they all knew by name? As Miss Marple walked back into the cool dusk air, she fingered the clasp of her reticule, ready to unearth the hidden motives lying just beneath the village's polite surface. Chapter 3. Whispers by the Milking Stall. The evening air held a chill as Miss Marple and Raymond West made their way along Old Hollow Lane, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. Lanterns flickered in cottage windows, casting wavering pools of light that danced across the hedgerows. The abandoned mill lay silent to their left, its broken paddles silent against the sky. Beyond the mill, a narrow footpath led to Cartwright Farm, where Annie Cartwright tended to her evening chores. Annie's small dairy cottage stood at the end of the lane, smoke curling from its chimney in lazy spirals. Cows lowed within a clapboard barn, and the rich scent of hay mingled with the sharp tang of fresh milk. Miss Marple tapped on the half-open door, and Annie emerged, her apron damp with early morning chores, her cheeks flushed by the chill. "Good evening, Miss Marple," Annie greeted, her voice hushed. I did not expect you at this hour." Miss Marple offered a warm smile. "I wondered if we might speak of what you saw 2 nights ago." Annie's eyes flicked nervously toward the dark barn. "Of course, ma'am. I'll fetch Michael," she said, slipping inside. Moments later, the farmhand appeared, lantern in hand, and nodded politely to Miss Marple and Raymond. "Miss Marple," he said deferentially, then lingered by the barn door. Miss Marple held up a gloved hand. "No need for introductions, Michael. Please, tell us what you observed." Annie led them into the barn, where 2 cows munched contentedly. Michael shut the door behind them. The lantern's flame trembled, illuminating straw on the floor and the shadowed outline of a milk churn. She drew a deep breath. "I was bringing in the last of the milking by torchlight," Annie began, her voice steadying. "It was just past 8 when I saw her, Mademoiselle Dupré, walking up the lane, coat collar turned high." She paused by the mill's entrance, looking over her shoulder as if expecting someone. Raymond jotted notes. Miss Marple nodded encouragement. And then Miss Marple prompted gently. Annie swallowed. "I heard a voice calling her name, low, urgent." She stopped, and a man stepped out from the shadow of the mill's wall. He wore a long, dark coat, and I couldn't see his face, but his posture, it was authoritative, almost coercive. Miss Marple's gaze narrowed. "Did you hear what he said?" Annie shook her head. No words I could make out, but I heard her reply, quiet at first, then sharper. "You promised you would not follow me here." Then she stepped back into the moonlight. She paused, eyes troubled, and then he seized her arm. I saw her struggle, and I cried out, but the torchlight was weak. By the time I ran outside, there was no one, just her footprints leading toward the mill, and then nothing. Raymond frowned. "You say she stepped into the moonlight. Did you note the footprints? Could they be followed?" "Yes," Annie said. "I marked them earlier today, but the rain washed them out this afternoon. Still, the ground was soft." Miss Marple pressed her lips together. "Thank you, Annie. That is most helpful. You said the voice was urgent. Did it seem familiar? Perhaps someone we know." Annie hesitated. "I thought the vicar passed by earlier that day, but his voice is gentler. This was harsher." Michael crossed his arms. "Miss Marple, I hate to say it, but that stormy fellow, Mr. Hammond, sometimes comes here at odd hours." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Hammond?" "He's the new solicitor in the village," Michael explained. "Tall, dark hair, intense eyes. He's been handling estate matters for Mrs. Trimble. Seems always in a hurry." Miss Marple tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I see. Thank you, Michael. That may explain the voice you heard." Annie looked from Michael to Miss Marple. "I don't like to gossip, ma'am, but Madame Dupré didn't trust him. She complained that he had asked too many questions about her family." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Very well. We shall follow up with Mr. Hammond. Meanwhile, Annie, you did the right thing in coming forward." Annie forced a small nod. "I only wish I'd done more." Miss Marple laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Every observation helps. Thank you." They left the barn, Annie returning to her chores, Michael closing the door behind them. As they walked back along the lane, Miss Marple paused beneath a flickering lamp. "Our first witness has given us both description and motive," she said softly. "A clandestine meeting, a coercive voice, and concerns about our Hammond." Raymond lit his cigarillo. "It seems the solicitor may have maneuvered herself into a corner," he mused. Miss Marple shook her head. "Not just a corner. Perhaps he may have seen her journal or heard rumors, something that frightened him." They reached the cottage where the vicarage's lamplight glowed through open windows. Emily Rudd stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes puffy from tears. "Miss Marple, thank you for coming," Emily whispered. "Monsieur Prey is resting in the study. He seems calmer." Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. "He must have the comfort of good company. We shall speak presently. But first, Emily, may I ask about your correspondence with your friend Elise?" Emily nodded and led them inside. The study was cozy and well lit. A fire crackled in the hearth. Lucien Dupre sat in an armchair, eyes closed, one hand pressed to his forehead. A teacup waited on the side table. "Monsieur Dupre," Miss Marple said, "thank you for waiting. This is Miss Emily Rudd." Dupre opened his eyes and managed a wan smile. "Miss Rudd, thank you for your hospitality." Emily curtsied slightly. "It was Elise who begged me to watch over her letters. We wrote almost daily." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Did you receive any particularly unsettling letters in recent weeks?" Emily sat beside Dupre. "Yes." At first, she spoke of a chance meeting with someone who offered to help her research a family secret. Then her tone changed. She mentioned being watched, overhearing voices at night. "Begged me to warn you, Miss Marple." Then the letters stopped. Raymond consulted his notebook. "And you have the envelope dates?" Emily produced a small bundle of envelopes. "Here, see for yourself." She handed them to Raymond, who noted the dates. For letters spread over a month, the last arriving 10 days ago. Miss Marple examined the final envelope. "No postmark anomalies?" Emily shook her head. "Nothing unusual." Miss Marple closed her eyes in thought. "So someone may have intercepted her last pleas." Dupre leaned forward. "My final letter to her went missing too. If our correspondence was intercepted, it suggests someone had inside knowledge." Miss Marple opened her eyes, gaze steady. "We have threads connecting Mr. Hammond, the missing journal, and an unseen observer. Tomorrow I shall accompany you to the cottage, and we shall search for overlooked clues. Tonight, though, rest is essential." Dupre exhaled, relief softening his features. "Thank you." Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "Emily, see that he is comfortable. Raymond, please secure these letters. And Annie must keep a watchful eye on that lane. No detail is too small." As they prepared to leave, Emily clasped Miss Marple's hand. "I fear for Elise. Thank you for caring." Miss Marple patted her hand. "All will become clear in time. Good night." Outside, the lane lay dark and silent once more. The moon, peeking through thin clouds, guided their steps back to St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple's mind whirred with possibilities. A coercive solicitor, intercepted letters, a lost journal filled with forbidden knowledge. Yet she knew the key lay not in haste but in patience, observing each reaction, each discarded scrap, until the hidden pattern emerged. And so, beneath the watching stars, the investigation deepened, its promise as chilling as the wind that rustled through the hedges, carrying whispers of truths not yet spoken. Chapter 4. A Call to the Solicitor. Morning light filtered through gauzy curtains in the study of the vicarage, casting pale rectangles across the worn carpet. Lucien Dupre sat in an armchair by the window, newspaper in hand, though his gaze drifted toward the garden path. Miss Marple entered quietly, her reticule dangling from one hand, and offered him a gentle nod. "Good morning," she said softly. "I trust you slept well?" Dupre set aside the newspaper, relief flickering across his face. "I did, thank you." Emily looked after me admirably. Miss Marple smiled. "Remarkable lady. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must call upon Mr. Hammond this morning. He resides not far from here, above his solicitor's chambers." Dupre's expression tightened. "You think he is involved?" Miss Marple shrugged delicately. "I only wish to observe his reaction to your sister's disappearance. Subtlety often invites truth." She paused at the door. "Raymond will escort you to the cottage later." Dupre nodded. "Very good." Miss Marple closed the door behind her and found Raymond in the adjoining drawing room, dusting off his notebook and pen. He stood promptly. "Ready?" she asked. "Quite," he replied, adjusting his coat. Together, they stepped into the crisp morning air and set off toward Hammond and Company, solicitors at the far end of the high street. The village stirred to life. A grocer swept his doorstep, a postmistress chatted with a delivery boy, and children on bicycles wove between the adults' heels. The solicitor's office occupied the upper 2 floors of a narrow brick building, its ground floor dominated by a shuttered storefront. A small brass plaque read, Hammond and Company, Solicitors, beneath which a second nameplate announced John Hammond, ESQ. A framed document in the window displayed professional qualifications. Miss Marple paused to inspect it, fingertips brushing the glass. "Mr. Hammond," she murmured, "you have a fine reputation. Let us hope your welcome is equally so." Raymond rapped on the polished wood door. It swung inward almost immediately, revealing a tidy vestibule lined with oak paneling and a staircase leading upward. The receptionist, Miss Phipps, peered over her spectacles. "Miss Marple, Mr. West," she greeted crisply. "Mr. Hammond is expecting you?" Her tone held a polite neutrality. Miss Marple inclined her head. "I thought an early visit might be agreeable." The receptionist's lips twitched. "Very well. He is in his office on the 2nd floor." She gestured toward the stairs. "Up and to the left." They climbed in silence. On the landing, a portrait of a younger Hammond in a frock coat hung between 2 windows. Beneath it, a narrow hallway led to several doors. Raymond tapped on the farthest. A voice called, "Enter." They stepped inside. John Hammond rose from behind a massive oak desk scattered with papers and ledgers. His dark hair gleamed under the overhead lamp, and his tailored suit strained slightly at the shoulders. His eyes, sharp and watchful, studied Miss Marple as she closed the door. "Miss Marple, what a surprise," he said with mild curiosity. "Mr. West, do sit down." Miss Marple settled into a high-backed chair opposite him, and Raymond took another by the window. Hammond leaned against the desk, one hand gripping the edge. "How can I help you?" he inquired. Miss Marple studied him politely. "I wish to introduce you to Monsieur Dupre's plight." She watched Hammond's expression flicker at the mention of Dupre's name. "His sister, Elise, has disappeared under troubling circumstances. He believes she was followed here and her letters intercepted." Hammond's brow creased. "I'm sorry to hear Monsieur Dupre's distress, though I confess I know little of his affairs." He smoothed the desk blotter. "What makes him think his letters were intercepted?" Miss Marple allowed a moment's silence. He received no reply to his last 3 letters. The postmark on the envelope suggested no irregularity, yet the contents never reached his hand. Hammond's jaw stiffened. "Well, the postal system in this village is dependable. I have handled several estate documents via the post, with no complaints." Raymond leaned forward. "Precisely why we came to you. Who else handles correspondence for St. Mary Mead? Are you privy to anyone who might monitor the mail?" Hammond's gaze flicked to Raymond, then back to Miss Marple. "I cannot imagine any solicitor engaging in such tactics. If Monsieur Dupre's mail is missing, he should alert the post office." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Indeed, though someone with influence or curiosity might employ other means. Have you, by chance, seen Monsieur Dupre's sister take refuge here? Any meeting in your office?" Hammond's eyes narrowed. "No, I would remember a visit from a foreign lady in distress. My office remains a place of professional courtesy." Miss Marple tapped her umbrella. "And yet, Annie Cartwright heard a harsh voice near the abandoned mill, one she thought might belong to you." Hammond's features hardened. "Have you accused me of assault?" His fingers curled around the desk's edge. Miss Marple's tone remained calm, merely repeating what a competent witness reported. "If it is incorrect, perhaps you can reassure us that your engagements that evening place you elsewhere." Hammond lifted an eyebrow. "I was in cemented meetings with my clients until late. You may verify with Mr. Birch at Trimble Hall, whose estate I assisted in settling." Miss Marple inclined her head. "We shall, thank you." Hammond's posture eased. He stroked his chin. "Very well. I understand your concern, but I have no motive to harm or frighten Monsieur Dupre's sister." Raymond folded his notebook. "Yet you discussed family matters with her, did you not? Mrs. Trimble's will included a clause concerning her late brother in Belgium that may have prompted inquiries." Hammond stiffened again. I gave legal counsel where required, nothing more. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. I thought we might speak of that privately. Miss Marple inclined her head. Of course. We will follow up with Mrs. Trimble's executor. But for now, it seems there is no direct evidence against you. Hammond's expression softened into a practiced smile. Then I trust you find my office above reproach. He stepped forward and extended a gloved hand. I sincerely hope Elise is found unharmed. Miss Marple took his hand. As do I, Mr. Hammond. He returned her grip with a steady nod, then released her. If there is anything further I can do, consultation, legal advice, please call. Miss Marple rose. Thank you. We shall be in touch. As they descended the stairs, Raymond exhaled softly. I'd like to see that meeting in writing. His manner felt over-defensive. Miss Marple regarded the portrait of Hammond above the reception desk. He is practiced in concealment, like many solicitors. But defense alone does not confirm guilt. She offered a reassuring glance to the receptionist, who watched them with mild curiosity. Once outside, the sharp breeze greeted them. Miss Marple tucked her reticule under her arm. Next, we will examine the cottage at Dupre's request. There may yet be clues the intruder overlooked. Raymond nodded. And I shall visit the post office on my way. They set off down the high street, past the baker's wares and the blacksmith's forge, taking the lane toward the abandoned mill. The solicitor's facade had crackled under gentle scrutiny, revealing little beyond guarded civility. But Miss Marple knew that the smallest fissure could betray far greater tension. Passing the ivy-clad walls of Mrs. Trimble's estate, she paused. Raymond, check with Birch at Trimble Hall, and arrange a discreet inquiry at the post office. We must confirm the delivery or diversion of those letters. Raymond whistled softly. Right away, Aunt Jane. Miss Marple's eyes glinted in the morning sun. Patience and perseverance, Raymond. The heart of this mystery lies in plain sight, if only we look closely enough. Together they continued toward Dupre's cottage, their steps echoing on the empty lane. Inside its low door a search awaited, drawers to sift, papers to examine, and a story to piece together from the fragments left behind. And somewhere within those fragments lay the key to Elise's fate, and the identity of the unseen observer whose hand had guided events in this hush of early day. Chapter 5. Echoes in Empty Rooms. Miss Marple paused on the threshold of the Dupre cottage as Raymond West raised the latch on the creaking front door. The small hallway beyond was dim and silent, lit only by slanted shafts of morning light that fell through the curtained windows. The wood paneling bore the faint smell of lavender that Elise Dupre had favored, mingled with the lingering chill of abandonment. Each step on the well-worn floorboards carried a faint echo, as though the walls themselves retained the whisper of her presence. Raymond set down his satchel and retrieved a leather-bound notebook. I've asked the vicar's gardener to keep watch for anyone suspicious, he said, flipping open the cover. He'll report anything out of the ordinary immediately. Miss Marple offered him a small smile of gratitude. Thank you, Raymond. But now, let us see what secrets these rooms conceal. She adjusted the muff of her reticule and stepped into the parlor, where a low mahogany table stood littered with scattering of papers, some torn, others folded with care. A single porcelain teacup lay overturned, its contents long since dried to a crusty stain. She knelt beside the table, examining a crumpled note half hidden beneath a stack of invoices. The handwriting was delicate yet firm. She smoothed it out. Meet me beneath the arch at dusk. Trust no one but the archivist. Miss Marple's lips pressed together. An archivist and an arch, she murmured. Elise was playing a careful game, and someone informed her of a meeting place. She passed the note to Raymond. Do you recognize the handwriting? He leaned over, brows furrowed. Too stylized to be her usual script. She wrote plainly in her letters. He tapped the page lightly. I'll have this photograph for comparison, but my gut says it belongs to a professional, someone used to official correspondence. Miss Marple nodded. Indeed. Let us continue. She rose and moved toward the study, where a battered oak desk sat against the far wall. Its single drawer was ajar. She opened it fully to reveal a neat pile of ledgers and a small leather satchel. Empty, Raymond joined her, producing a slender flashlight from his coat pocket. Her journal cannot be far. The satchel suggests she carried a small volume of great importance. Miss Marple swept her gaze over the desk surface. Look here, indentations on the blotter, as though an entire page was written then removed. She turned the blotter over, discovering a faint watermark, a single line of text pressed into the paper. We may recover what was written. She retrieved her magnifying glass from her reticule and held it aloft. Carefully, she began to trace the impressions, her brows knitting with concentration. After a moment, she read aloud, "Must reveal the brother's secret before the will is signed." She frowned. This refers to Mrs. Trimble's late brother, and the clause I suspected. Elise believed it was important enough to warrant secrecy. Raymond jotted the phrase in his notebook. If someone wanted to suppress that clause, they would see her as a threat. Miss Marple closed the drawer gently and stood. But we still lack specifics. Let us see the bedroom. They crossed the narrow corridor to the back of the cottage, where a small chamber waited. The single bed was made, the covers undisturbed as though Elise had never lain there. A wardrobe stood open, its hangers empty, save for a single shawl of pale blue silk. She lifted the shawl, noting its fine stitch and foreign weave. This is not English work, she observed. Perhaps a gift from her family in Belgium. Raymond examined the shawl's hem. See here, a name stitched in the corner. A D, he read. No other markings. Miss Marple returned the shawl to its place. Thank you, but we ought to look beneath the bed. She crouched to sweep aside a dust cloth, revealing a small wooden box hidden behind the legs. She retrieved it and opened the lid. Inside lay a handful of old photographs. Elise standing with an elderly man in a grand library, his arm around her shoulder as they both smiled at the camera. The man's face was familiar. He resembled Mrs. Trimble's late husband, Baron Dupré, though older and thinner. She handed a photograph to Raymond. That archive, perhaps, she murmured. She traveled to London to consult a private collection tied to her family's history. She studied the landscape beyond the library windows in the photo, rows of leather-bound volumes and a broad stained-glass window. We must identify that room. Raymond slid the photo into his notebook. I'll cross-reference it with records at the antiquarian circle. Miss Marple nodded. Excellent. Now, the wardrobe floor. She tapped on the wooden planks and listened. A hollow sound rang beneath. Kneeling, she pried loose one board to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside lay a roll of parchment, tied with a black ribbon. With gloved care, she unfurled the parchment. It was a fragment of legal text, an amendment to Mrs. Trimble's will, specifying a clause that would disinherit her nephew in favor of an unnamed beneficiary, described only as the surviving sibling of Baron Dupré. The signature was initialed J.H. Miss Marple's eyes glinted. J.H., John Hammond's initials. She refolded the parchment with deliberate slowness. This is more than coincidence. Elise sought to understand her aunt's will, and someone added a postscript. Raymond's voice was low. He had motive to silence her if her research threatened his client's inheritance. Miss Marple pocketed the parchment. Indeed, yet we must proceed with caution. A single parchment does not condemn a man. We must see whether Mrs. Trimble herself is aware of this amendment. Raymond closed his notebook. We'll visit Trimble Hall tomorrow. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirts. She approached the window and gazed across the lane where the mill lay half hidden by ivy. The archivist, the arch, the hidden clause, everything ties back to London, and back here in St. Mary Mead to John Hammond. Raymond crossed the room and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You found what he overlooked. Miss Marple turned to him with a knowing smile. We have found a clue, but not the whole thread. Elise vanished before she could confirm whether this amendment was authentic or forged. We must learn the truth. They replaced the floorboard, returned the box to its hiding place, and prepared to leave. As they stepped into the hallway, the front door opened behind them. Dupré's anxious face appeared. Monsieur Dupré, Miss Marple greeted him. We have made progress. May I show you something? He stepped forward, concern etched in his features. Anything, Miss Marple. She held out the photograph and the parchment. Your sister discovered this amendment and documented it here. It bears John Hammond's initials. Does this surprise you? Dupre stared at the parchment, voice trembling. This? I had no idea. My aunt never mentioned such a clause. Miss Marple's gaze was gentle yet firm. It appears someone, perhaps Hammond, added it later. Your sister sought to verify its authenticity. Now her notes are missing, and we have only these fragments. Dupre's shoulders slumped. Then she was right to fear. This changes everything. Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on his arm. Rest assured we will see this matter through. But for now, let us return to the vicarage. You need comfort, and tomorrow we will visit Trimble Hall. As they stepped outside, the first notes of a church bell tolled across the village. In the chill afternoon air, the patchwork of clues glinted like shards of glass. A clandestine meeting, a professional correspondent, a hidden amendment, and a solicitor whose reputation now stood under quiet suspicion. In that moment, Elise Dupre's absence felt more urgent than ever, her voice present in every whisper of paper and shadow of a floorboard. And Miss Marple, knitting together these fragments with her patient skill, knew that the heart of the mystery lay just beyond the horizon, waiting to be revealed at the precise moment. Chapter 6. Confrontations at Trimble Hall. A gentle mist clung to the rolling lawns of Trimble Hall as Miss Marple, Raymond West, and Lucien Dupre stepped from a carriage. The venerable Georgian facade loomed before them, its limestone pillars filigreed with creeping ivy. Beyond the portico, the gravel drive curved toward a pair of wrought iron gates, behind which the scent of yew hedges mingled with that of early blooming azaleas. Raymond closed the carriage door for Dupre and offered his arm to Miss Marple. "Shall we?" he asked quietly. Miss Marple nodded, smoothing her gloves. Indeed, Mrs. Trimble must see these papers. She lifted her parasol against the drizzle, and perhaps share her own thoughts. They crossed the threshold into a grand entrance hall, where a servant in livery bowed. The marble floor gleamed in the wax torchlight, and portraits of stern ancestors watched dispassionately from gilded frames. A butler appeared, a tall, silver-haired man with impeccable posture. "Miss Marple, Mr. West, Monsieur Dupre," he intoned, ushering them toward a drawing-room on the left. "Mrs. Trimble awaits you." The drawing-room's tall windows overlooked the grounds, their mullions traced by early raindrops. Rich damask drapes framed high-backed chairs, and a marble fireplace held logs smoldering beneath an ornate screen. Seated by the hearth was Mrs. Edith Trimble, a woman in her late 60s whose poised bearing and finely tailored gown spoke of long habit and careful etiquette. Her sharp eyes studied the visitors with polite interest. "Jane!" she greeted Miss Marple with an imperceptible nod. "Raymond, Monsieur Dupre. I trust you found the journey pleasant enough." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Thank you, Edith. We apologize for calling so early. This concerns your late husband's estate, and regrettably, my friend's missing sister." Mrs. Trimble's expression flickered. "Elise Dupre. Yes, I heard of her disappearance this morning. A most distressing affair." Raymond took a seat beside Dupre. "We discovered this parchment hidden in her wardrobe," he said, laying the folded document on a small table. "It amends your will, adding a clause to bequeath your estate to the surviving sibling of Baron Dupre, initial J.H. Mrs. Trimble's well-plucked brows rose. "Initial J.H.? My late husband's name was Frederick T. Trimble, no J.H. there." Miss Marple leaned forward. "These initials match your solicitor's, John Hammond. Would you care to comment?" Mrs. Trimble's lips thinned. She glanced at the butler, who stood discreetly in the corner. "Mr. Hammond advised me on my will, but I never signed any amendment after his first draft. I have the copies here in my safe." She rose and swept across to a side cabinet, unlatching it with a small key. From within, she retrieved a sheaf of documents and placed them before them. Raymond spread the papers on a polished mahogany sideboard. "Your original will and one codicil from last year, but nothing dated after March 20th of this year," he observed, tapping the ledger. "No amendment bearing this clause." Mrs. Trimble folded her gloved hands. "None. I would have remembered altering the beneficiary, especially in favor of a stranger. Dupre rose, voice trembling. But I found Mrs. Dupre's journal missing, and here is proof someone forged a clause to benefit me, my sister. Mrs. Trimble's eyes softened at Dupre's earnest distress. Baron Dupre was my dearest friend. I would welcome Elise with open arms, but only if she were truly family. Yet I never signed such a bequest. Miss Marple studied Mrs. Trimble's face. You have no reason to deceive us, Edith. But someone may have sought to entangle you in forgery, then remove the evidence. Mrs. Trimble drew a deep breath. Then I must insist that Mr. Hammond account for his papers. He had sole custody of the amendment when I last saw him. Miss Marple nodded. We shall speak with him again. But first, Edith, did you ever meet your brother's surviving siblings in England, aside from Elise? Mrs. Trimble's expression grew distant. No, I might have once encountered a cousin at a charity ball in London, but no more. Raymond's pen scribbled. And the executors you named? Birch at Trimble Hall, and Mr. Hammond. Mrs. Trimble's gaze flicked toward the door. Yes, Birch has handled day-to-day affairs for decades. Mr. Hammond arrived only after that. I grew to trust him. She took a seat again, smoothing her skirt with trembling fingers. I must confess, when I first read of Elise's disappearance, my heart ached. Yet part of me wonders if I should have been more aware of her presence here. Miss Marple settled herself opposite Mrs. Trimble. Elise approached you by letter, yes? Did she mention this clause or the motivation behind it? Mrs. Trimble shook her head. Only that she believed I had omitted her from my will, deliberately or by oversight. My letters to her assured her of my goodwill. Dupre's eyes filled with hope. She would not invent an amendment. She sought the truth. A soft knock announced Mr. Birch's entrance, a stout gentleman with thinning hair and polite severity. He bowed to Mrs. Trimble and the party. Mrs. Trimble, your solicitor, Mr. Hammond, is here to see you, he announced. He awaits in the hallway. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Raymond. Perfect timing. Edith, may we continue this conversation in Hammond's presence? Mrs. Trimble rose, composure returning. Of course. They followed Mr. Birch into the hall, where John Hammond stood with folded arms and an expression unreadable. The flickering chandelier cast half his face in shadow. Mrs. Trimble, Hammond said with brisk formality, I trust your guests are comfortable. Mrs. Trimble gestured. We have discovered an amendment, initial with your initials, that I never signed. This parchment was hidden in Elise Dupre's cottage. I require an explanation. Hammond's eyes flickered to Miss Marple, then to Birch. An amendment? I drafted an additional clause concerning your brother's estate, but I never had instruction to finalize it. Miss Marple's voice was soft but precise. Yet your initials appear on that parchment. Will you show us your working drafts? Hammond's jaw stiffened. My office archives hold the drafts. If a forged document bore my initials, someone crafted it carefully. Raymond stepped forward, holding the parchment. So you deny forging it? Hammond's shoulders relaxed, a faint smile playing on his lips. I deny it. I drafted many documents that year. That parchment could have been one of several versions, removed from my office, then suppressed when deemed unnecessary. Mrs. Trimble's gaze darted between Hammond and Birch. Is this true, Mr. Birch? Could such a document vanish? Birch cleared his throat. Miss Marple, Mr. Hammond maintains the utmost discretion. Yet a forged document of this nature would be indistinguishable without proper record-keeping. Miss Marple crossed her hands, which means someone with access, either at Hammond's office or here at the estate, could have crafted this forgery. Hammond's brow creased. Mrs. Trimble, do any of your staff have motive to protect your estate? Mrs. Trimble clasped her hands. My housekeeper is loyal, though she resented Elise's involvement. Beyond that, I know of no one. Miss Marple's gaze softened as she regarded each face. Thank you. We shall inspect your office records and interview the housekeeper. Your candor is appreciated, though the matter remains unresolved. With that, she inclined her head to Mrs. Trimble and, alongside Raymond and Dupre, departed the hall, leaving Hammond and Birch exchanging grave looks behind them. Outside, the mist had turned to drizzle. Miss Marple offered Dupré her arm. We have stirred hidden tensions. Tomorrow, we shall inspect Hammond's archives and speak with the housekeeper. She paused on a gravel path. And elsewhere, we must consider other villagers, those who might benefit from Elise's disappearance. Raymond nodded. Mrs. Petherick, the vicar's daughter, even Michael the farmhand, all have secrets. Miss Marple's eyes glinted. Indeed, secrets are the currency of this mystery. With each revelation, our path grows clearer, though further shadows remain. Let us proceed with care. As they made their way back toward St. Mary Mead, the gates of Trimble Hall clanged shut behind them, marking another quiet confrontation in a case woven with hidden agendas, forged papers, and the unspoken promise that no secret can remain buried forever. Chapter 7. Echoes in the Millstone Library. Late morning found Miss Marple and Raymond West making their way once more to Hammond and Company, this time with purpose sharper than before. The solicitor's office, with its polished brass plaque and austere facade, seemed to regard them impassively as they climbed the stairs. A sense of expectancy accompanied each measured footstep on the narrow hallway boards. Miss Phipps, the receptionist, greeted them with the faintest of curtsies. Miss Marple, Mr. West, Mr. Hammond is in conference, but I have prepared the draft you requested. She led them to a small waiting room lined with leather-bound volumes. A single window admitted a narrow shaft of sunlight, dust motes dancing like motored insects in its beam. Miss Marple seated herself with her characteristic poise. Raymond took out his notebook. Ready. Moments later, the door opened and Hammond entered, his expression composed but wary. Behind him trailed his junior clerk, Mr. Fulton, carrying a neat pile of ledgers and bound drafts. Hammond nodded courteously. You wish to see the documents? Miss Marple inclined her head. Thank you, Mr. Hammond. We would compare the draft you prepared for Mrs. Trimble's will against this amendment. She gestured to Raymond, who handed the parchment with the forged clause to Hammond. Hammond took it, glancing at the initials J.H. with a mixture of recognition and bafflement. This does bear my initials, he admitted, but I assure you it was never part of the final bundle I presented to Mrs. Trimble. These are my working drafts. He motioned to Mr. Fulton. Henry, please lay them out. Mr. Fulton arranged 6 volumes on a long table. For labeled drafts, 1 marked codicil, and 1 final. Miss Marple examined each in turn, noting meticulous revisions in one draft after another. The final bore a neat signature of Mrs. Trimble, but contained no mention of Baron Dupré's sibling. None of the drafts included the bequest to Elise. Raymond tapped the forged parchment against the edge of the table. This appeared only in the cottage. It does not correspond to any of these drafts. Hammond returned it, his gaze fixed on the table. I'm perplexed, he said in measured tones. If this were ever drafted here, it must have been an intermediate version. But every page I produced is accounted for in these bound volumes. Miss Marple folded her hands. So either an undocumented draft existed, one you misplaced, or someone forged one to implicate you. She studied Hammond's face with her gentle yet incisive scrutiny. Do you ever remove working copies from your office? Hammond's jaw tightened. Only on rare occasion, if I need to consult clients in the field. But then I noted in the ledger. He tapped a slim book. Mr. Fulton can confirm no such removal is recorded. Mr. Fulton nodded. Nothing in the log, madam. Every document remains here. Miss Marple's lips curved in a subtle smile. Thank you, Mr. Fulton. That suggests the parchment found in the cottage is indeed a forgery, an instrument to deflect suspicion. Hammond's shoulders relaxed. So it seems. Miss Marple stood. One more matter. You mentioned taking Mrs. Trimble's instructions and then discarding any unnecessary drafts. Where do your discarded pages go? Hammond hesitated. I keep them for 30 days, then burn them in the stove. He leaned forward. I can show you the burn register, if you wish. Miss Marple inclined her head. Very well. We shall examine it presently. She turned to Raymond. Shall we proceed to the vicarage? I wish to compare these details with echoes in the Dupré cottage. Hammond inclined his head. I shall provide the register. He dismissed Mr. Fulton and Miss Phipps, and the three departed toward the vicarage at a brisk pace. In the vicarage garden, Emily Rudd tended the roses, her cheeks still wet from recent tears. Miss Marple found her kneeling beside a budded bush. "Emily!" she called softly, and the young woman straightened. "Miss Marple," she said, voice tremulous, "is everything progressing?" "As well as we might hope," Miss Marple answered. She produced a forged parchment and the photograph of the library. Emily's eyes widened. Elise feared for her life after uncovering these documents. Emily sank onto a nearby bench. I never knew she was working on legal matters. She confided only that she believed the will had been altered unfairly. Miss Marple's gaze wandered to the rosebuds. "And you? Did you ever speak of these worries to anyone?" Emily shook her head. "No. I thought Mrs. Trimble had everything in hand." She pressed her hand to her heart. "I wish I had warned someone sooner." Miss Marple knelt beside her. Fear can stifle speech. "But perhaps you recall something else, an overheard phrase, a visitor's name, any detail you might have dismissed at the time." Emily frowned. She glanced toward the vicarage door. "Last week, I heard someone pacing the library at Trimble Hall late at night. A woman's sobs, followed by a man's stern voice. I thought it might be Mrs. Trimble speaking with Mr. Hammond." Miss Marple's eyes glinted. "So the housekeeper's tale holds weight. We must speak with Mrs. Andrews." Emily wiped her eyes. "She is loyal to Mrs. Trimble, but quiet about the staff's goings-on." Miss Marple rose. "Then we shall proceed with delicacy. Raymond, escort Emily indoors. I will visit Mrs. Andrews at the hall." Trimble Hall's staff wing lay to the rear of the main house. The corridor was narrow and dimly lit. Oil lamps burned in sconces at regular intervals. Miss Marple approached the heavy, oaken door marked "Housekeeper." She knocked softly. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Andrews, a woman in her 50s, her hair coiled neatly beneath a linen cap. Her face bore the steadiness of years in service, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern at Miss Marple's unexpected visit. "Madam," she said, stepping aside to admit her. "How may I help you?" Miss Marple entered, pausing to regard the orderly room. Polished cupboards, a small writing desk, and a burning fire spoke of domestic authority. Mrs. Andrews closed the door behind them. "I wish to speak of last week's events," Miss Marple began gently. "You may recall hearing voices in the library late at night." Mrs. Andrews stiffened. "I heard Mrs. Trimble weeping, yes." Then Mr. Hammond's voice, stern, commanding. Miss Marple sat in a straight-back chair. "Do you recall the nature of their conversation?" Mrs. Andrews clasped her hands. "Only fragments. Mrs. Trimble mentioned trust broken." Mr. Hammond replied, "You have no choice." Then I hurried away. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Trust broken, no choice." She leaned forward. "After that night, did you observe any changes in the library? Did any papers move, cupboards open?" Mrs. Andrews hesitated. "I did find one of Mrs. Trimble's drawers ajar the next morning. Inside was a leather satchel belonging to Elise Dupre, empty except for old photographs." Miss Marple's eyes lit. "So Hammond may have retrieved those photographs, removing evidence of Elise's inquiries into her family." Mrs. Andrews nodded. "I confronted him in the hall. He said he was helping Mrs. Trimble organize the papers, and I must trust his judgment." Miss Marple rose and smiled kindly. "As you did. Thank you, Mrs. Andrews. Your discretion and honesty are most appreciated." Outside, the sky had darkened with gathering clouds. Miss Marple met Raymond and Emily Rudd near the carriage drive. Raymond closed his notebook. "Well," he asked. Miss Marple laid a gentle hand on his arm. "We have learned that Hammond escorted himself to the housekeeper's quarters with Elise's satchel, retrieving her photographs and possibly other papers. His explanation strained belief." Emily's face paled. "He used Mrs. Trimble's distress to conceal removal of evidence." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, yet we require confirmation. Hammond's burn register. If those working drafts were indeed burned, the record will show entries after the date Elise disappeared." Raymond pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket. He promised to deliver it by this evening. Miss Marple glanced at the horizon. Then tonight, we shall revisit the solicitor's office. But for now, let us consider one more avenue. The mill itself. Perhaps traces remain where the voices first echoed. Emily's eyes filled with fresh hope. I will go with you. Miss Marple inclined her head. Very well. Raymond, escort Emily home. I shall join you shortly at Old Hollow Lane. As they parted, the three knew the path ahead, a solitary walk to the deserted mill in the gathering dusk, where secrets lay awaiting discovery, and where the faintest echo might reveal the name of the unseen betrayer. Chapter 8. Whispers at the Abandoned Mill. The sky had turned the color of gunmetal by the time Miss Marple arrived at Old Hollow Lane, where the abandoned mill stood sentinel in the gathering dusk. A damp mist curled along the ground, and the leafless branches of the ancient water wheel groaned with the weight of rain. Emily Rudd stood at the gate, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, eyes bright with both trepidation and resolve. "Thank you for coming, Miss Marple," Emily whispered as Miss Marple joined her. "I was reluctant at first, but I cannot rest until I understand what happened to Elise." Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. "You have done admirably, Emily. Tonight, we shall walk the path she took, and perhaps recover what she left behind." She produced a small lantern from her reticule, its flame steady in the damp air. "We must move quietly." They stepped through the wrought iron gate, its rusted hinges protesting in a low groan. The gravel path led toward the mill's entrance, half obscured by brambles and the creeping shadows of the riverbank. With each step, the mist curled upward, shrouding their ankles and making the air feel alive with hidden motion. Emily hesitated. "I saw her here that night," she said, voice trembling. "She stood near the wheel, looking for someone." Miss Marple nodded. "An exchange, perhaps?" And something went awry. She paused by the mill's crumbling wall, where the bricks were etched with moss. "Look there!" Footprints in the soft earth beside the door. The lantern's light revealed two sets of prints, one delicate and narrow, the other broader and more resolute. Emily knelt, brushing her gloved hand gently over the impressions. "Her boots," she murmured, "and it is no doubt." Miss Marple leaned in, eyes narrowing. "The stride is long." He moved quickly toward her. She traced a faint disturbance in the soil, a secondary print, as though she had slipped or stumbled. "See this, Emily? She may have fallen." Emily's face paled. She did say she stumbled on uneven ground. She rose, voice firm. "We must see inside." Miss Marple nodded. They pushed open the heavy wooden door, which swung inward on rusted hinges, revealing the mill house's cavernous interior. The lantern's glow pierced the gloom to fall upon a floor strewn with broken gears, shattered pottery, and damp straw. A single beam of moonlight filtered through a broken window high above, illuminating a dusty table beneath it. "Poor place for a meeting," Emily said, stepping forward gingerly. Miss Marple followed, lantern held aloft. On the table lay a scrap of paper, corners rolled and pages torn. She picked it up delicately. In a careful hand, it read, "Must not trust Hammond. He watches too closely." Miss Marple's lips pressed together. She left this behind in haste. She folded the note and slipped it into an envelope from her reticule. "This confirms her fear of Mr. Hammond. But who else watched her here?" Emily's eyes darted to the far corner, where the stone wall was slick with moss. "I saw him step back there," she whispered. "He wore the dark coat." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes." She set the note aside on the table and continued her inspection. Beneath the table, she spotted a tuft of pale blue silk caught on a splintered edge. "Her shawl," she said. She dropped it in her struggle. She lifted the fragment, noting the stitch work. She tried to cling to him. Emily's hand went to her throat. Poor Elise. She brushed away a spider's web from the stone floor beside the table and revealed a dark stain, no larger than a coin but distinctly wet. "Blood," she breathed. She was wounded. Miss Marple knelt, examining the stain. "It is fresh enough that the mill interior could hold clues. We must photograph this and have the coroner confirm what the stain signifies." She rose, offering Emily her arm. Let us step outside for a moment. I wish to consider the layout. Outside, the mist had thickened, muffling even the rush of the river as it slipped past the mill's wheel. Emily shivered despite her shawl. Miss Marple draped her own coat around the younger woman's shoulders. "You saw only a fleeting figure," she said. "Tell me everything." Emily inhaled sharply. He called her name. "Elise!" And she turned. He advanced, hand outstretched. She backed away, clutching her shawl, then stumbled. I called out, but he heard nothing. Miss Marple's gaze traveled upward to the broken window. He must have pulled her inside. She pointed to a gap in the planks where sunlight once fell. From inside, he might have dragged her in further, away from prying eyes. Emily's eyes widened, and then she dared not finish. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Then we must follow those footsteps. Come." She guided Emily to the side of the mill, where a narrow crawl space led beneath a low arch this way. They crawled through the muddy passage, emerging in a small crawl space behind the mill. Here, the ground was firmer and the river's roar was muted. Miss Marple knelt and found a small scrap of parchment, the corner of a torn envelope, postmarked St. Mary Mead. She retrieved it. "Another dropped letter, perhaps sent to you, Emily." She looked at the smudged postmark. It may bear the only clue to where she was headed. Emily reached for the scrap, peering at the faded ink. "It's addressed to my dearest friend." She traced the faded script. She intended to send it to me. Miss Marple studied the scrap. Then this was on her person when she fled. She tucked it into her reticule. "Now let us climb back out. We have enough to guide us." As they emerged into the cool night air, a distant bark of a dog echoed through the trees. Emily's heart skipped. Someone else is here. Miss Marple tilted her head. Perhaps someone aware we would search this place. She gestured toward the riverbank. "We shall leave swiftly and alert the vicar's gardener to guard the mill until dawn." They retraced their steps along the gravel lane, emerging once more beneath the lantern's glow at the gate. Emily paused. Why would someone bring her here, only to abandon her? Miss Marple's gaze was steady. To delay us. If the attempt were meant to frighten her, the mill's isolation would serve well. Yet she fought, she left traces. She held up the silk and the scrap of letter. These pieces will speak louder than any confession. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I understand. She glanced back at the looming silhouette of the mill. I hope no one else is hurt. Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Your courage has given us new leads. The silk, the blood, the note warning against trust. Before dawn, we will visit Hammond's office again, and perhaps the post office, to place these fragments in context. Emily exhaled, steadying herself. Let me help. Miss Marple smiled. Your role is crucial. Tomorrow, you will accompany Raymond to identify the postmark, and I will pursue Hammond's burn register. But tonight we have done well. They walked back toward the heart of St. Mary Mead, lantern bobbing between them like a lone star guiding them onward. Behind, the abandoned mill watched in silence, its secrets half buried in shadow and mist, awaiting the moment when every fragment would fit into the pattern and reveal the face behind the darkness. Chapter 9, Ash and Ink. Before dawn broke over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple gathered her evidence and set out toward Hammond and Company. At the same hour, Raymond West and Emily Rudd made their way to the little red brick post office at the corner of High Street. Each carried scraps of paper and photographs, the silk fragment, the mill note, the torn envelope, in hopes of tracing Elise's final messages and confirming the solicitor's concealed deeds. At the post office, the sorting room's piles of parcels and letters teetered on wooden shelves. The postmaster, Mr. Benson, a rotund man with keen eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles, greeted Raymond and Emily with polite surprise. Emily handed him the scrap envelope recovered from the mill. He peered at the smudged ink, then consulted his ledger. This postmark is stamped May 22nd, he said. I recall an undeliverable letter returned to sender that day, marked refused, then filed. Fetching a worn leather-bound ledger, he read aloud the entry. May 22nd, 1825, letter to Miss J. Marple, High Street. Refused by recipient returned. Emily and Raymond exchanged worried glances. Why would Miss Marple refuse her letter? Emily asked, unless someone forged Miss Marple's refusal. Mr. Benson nodded gravely. If this was a forgery, it happened before the letter reached me. I'll make you a copy of the ledger entry. He stamped and handed them the facsimile. Keep it safe. Meanwhile, at Hammond and Company, Miss Marple entered the private office where John Hammond stood beside a roaring fire, holding his burn register. Thank you for providing this, she said, nodding toward the book. I see here, May 22nd, 1825, one bundle of draft documents burned. She tapped the line. That matches the date of Elise's last known letter and the post office refusal. Hammond's composure flickered. I burned routine drafts then, he replied. Miss Marple slid the forged amendment across the desk. These initials are yours, yet no such draft appears in your volumes. Hammond's palms pressed flat to the desk. I maintain any illicit draft was forged elsewhere. Miss Marple inclined her head. Very well. I shall require a sample of the ashes from your stove to confirm whether any suspicious documents were burned that night. Hammond agreed to provide access once the fire cooled. Outside, Miss Marple reunited with Raymond and Emily at the vicarage garden gate. They laid out their fragments, the ledger copy, the scrap envelope, and the refusal facsimile. Elise's plea was silenced by an official refusal, Raymond said, and Hammond's register shows a bundle burned the same day. Emily added, someone intercepted her letter and destroyed his drafts. 2 operations, one to suppress her message, the other to erase her evidence. Miss Marple surveyed the mist-shrouded roses. The forging of Miss Marple's refusal stamp and the burning of potentially incriminating drafts both suggest a hand both skilled and desperate. She turned to Emily. You must report this to Mrs. Trimble. Her solicitor may have overstepped his commission. Emily nodded. I will see her at once. Miss Marple then addressed Raymond. You and I shall prepare to collect the ashes tonight. I have arranged for Mrs. Andrews to meet us at Hammond's. Her account of Hammond's nocturnal activities will fill gaps. As Emily hurried toward Trimble Hall, Miss Marple and Raymond stood beneath the pale sky, fragments of paper and burned memory pressed against their hearts. Raymond exhaled. We have found the heart of the conspiracy. Interception and destruction. Now we must link it to the one who benefits. Miss Marple smiled softly. Yes, and we must strike at the precise moment when every stray thread becomes part of the pattern. They parted at the vicarage gate. Each should prepare for the long day ahead, knowing the next clue would bring them one step closer to Elise's fate and the identity of the unseen hand that sought to bury her voice in both ink and flame. Chapter 10, The Unmasking. Miss Marple summoned the village's principal figures to Mrs. Petherick's drawing room, arranging them by the low hearth as dusk fell once more. Mrs. Trimble, pale but resolute, sat beside Mrs. Petherick, whose usual airs were tempered by concern. Raymond West stood near the window, clutching his notebook, while Emily Rudd remained close to Lucien Dupre, who himself trembled with anticipation. In the center, behind an ornate tea table, John Hammond took his place, composure intact though a subtle tension played across his features. Miss Marple, knitting needles idle in her lap, surveyed the assembly with gentle authority. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began, voice soft but carrying. Monsieur Dupre's plight, and the disappearance of his sister, has tested the bonds of our quiet village. Tonight, I shall explain what befell Elise and name the person responsible. A hush fell. Even the ticking of the mantel clock seemed to pause. Elise Dupre arrived in St. Mary Mead seeking the truth of a family inheritance. Miss Marple continued. She believed Mrs. Trimble had omitted her from her late brother's will. In her determination, she uncovered a forged amendment, initialed by our solicitor, Mr. Hammond. She held up the small parchment. This document never existed in Hammond's files. It was planted in her cottage to implicate him and divert suspicion. Yet the forgery bore telltale signs of his handwriting style. Hammond's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. Her letters for help were intercepted. Miss Marple went on. A refusal stamp, forged in Miss Marple's name, turned her May 22nd letter away at our post office. That same evening, Mr. Hammond burned one bundle of drafts, declared routine, though nothing in his burned register matches the forged amendment. She paused, glancing at the register Hammond had shown them. Why destroy ordinary drafts on the very night someone sought your aid? Because the bundle contained the only trace of that amendment, evidence of the forgery. Hammond's lips pressed then. Mrs. Trimble gasped. Miss Rudd, you found Elise near the abandoned mill, wounded, Miss Marple said, turning to Emily. She resisted her pursuer, leaving footprints, a fragment of her shawl and a bloodstain. In the darkness, she slipped during her flight and fainted. Emily nodded, tears glistening. She was carried, by the architect of her misery, to a deserted shepherd's hut across the river. Miss Marple continued. There, her assailant hoped she would remain without aid. But Annie Cartwright's unexpected outcry at dawn brought Michael the farmhand, who discovered her and summoned Mrs. Andrews to tend her injuries. A murmur swept the room as Dupree steadied himself, hope dawning behind his worry. Mr. Hammond, Miss Marple said, her tone measured, you arranged to meet her at the mill under pretense of counsel. You traveled there in your solicitor's coat, the very coat Annie Cartwright recognized. When she resisted your questions, you panicked. To prevent her from revealing your act, you forced her inside, hoping to frighten her into silence, then left her unconscious, believing no one would follow. Hammond swallowed sharply. Miss Marple, you are in error. Am I? She interrupted gently, holding his gaze. Your footprints matched the mud found inside the mill. Your solicitor's seal was used to forge the refusal stamp. Samples of your wax and seal are missing from your office inventory. Mrs. Andrews saw you retrieve Elise's satchel of photographs from Trimble Hall under cover night, removing evidence of her research. And your burn register conceals one small pile of unrecorded ashes, since you discarded the practice of logging every item after she went missing. He rose, voice trembling. You have misinterpreted it all. Miss Marple stood as well, her knitting needles clicking once. No, Mr. Hammond, every action you took was designed to suppress Elise's discoveries and protect your position. You fear that the true will clause would strip your profession of a significant client, and with it, your inheritance of goodwill. Mrs. Trimble's eyes filled with sorrow. You betrayed my trust. Hammond turned to her, shoulders slumped. He closed his eyes. I did it to preserve this state. I never meant harm, but she saw too much. Dupree stepped forward, anger and relief mingling in his gaze. You endangered her life. At that moment, Michael Cartwright and Mrs. Andrews entered, supporting a frail figure wrapped in a shawl. Elise Dupree herself. Her face was pallid but determined. A gentle fire flickered in her eyes. I remember everything, she said softly, looking at Hammond. You spoke of loyalty to Mrs. Trimble, but loyalty earned you more in commission than her peace. She drew a ragged breath. Then I heard Annie's shout and Michael's footsteps. They saved me. Miss Marple motioned to Michael. Your timely intervention spared her life. Annie Cartwright smiled bravely. I didn't think, only that I must help. Miss Marple turned back to Hammond. Mr. Hammond, you will accompany Mr. Birches and Mr. Benson to the magistrate. There you will answer for forgery, assault, and attempted obstruction of justice. He bowed his head in resignation. Mrs. Trimble rose and moved to Elise's side. My dear, you are safe now. She embraced her niece, her voice choked with emotion. Forgive us for failing you. Elise nodded, tears in her eyes. Aunt Edith, you have always held me in your heart. Miss Marple replaced her knitting and offered a small smile of warmth. Let us remember that truth, like a well-woven tapestry, requires each thread. Tonight, the pattern is clear. The company dispersed, some to comfort Elise and Dupree, others to summon authorities. Miss Marple lingered by the hearth, gazing at the logs glowing orange in the grate. Raymond joined her, offering his arm. Well done, Aunt Jane, he murmured. She patted his arm. The village can resume its quiet routine now, though with deeper understanding of the hearts that dwell here. She paused, knitting needles poised once more. Human nature is at once precious and perilous. But justice, when guided by patient observation, lights the way. As dawn's first light edged the sky, Miss Marple stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the soft glow. St. Mary Mead would awaken to peace restored. Its secrets laid bare by nothing more than a sharp mind, gentle perseverance, and the steadfast courage of those who refuse to look away.